Alright, so now we can go ahead and drop the camera into the pod. We'll just go ahead and assemble the whole pod. I put all of my camera gear in the pod, and I'm going to be using a Runcam Swift 2. And of course we gotta swap the backs out, so we'll go ahead and get the bracket all assembled on the camera, and then we'll get the camera installed into the pod. So like I was saying before, this foam they give you here is to go on the back of the camera, and they give you quite a bit of it, but we only really need to put it on this little strip. So I just cut it and then you get the extra for later in case you need to replace it. So we just go ahead and put this right there, and pull the back plate off. Helps if we use the right screwdriver. Ah, there we go. Alright. Pull the back plate off. Won't need the screws that are in the back plate, because they give you these nice fancy screws. So, go ahead, put your bracket on the back. And you'll take these screws here. Two of them. And these screws are awesome. So they have plenty of bite on them, and they are exactly the right length. Alright, there we go. Bracket is on the camera. So now let's just get it in the pod. I'm going to take your little washers, throw your bolt in them. Make sure the camera's the right way up. You know what, I'm going to clean these holes up just a little bit. Alright, now we can go ahead and throw the camera in here. Now, I have some shorter screws that I'm going to go ahead and use. These are actually motor screws that come in the Xnova motor, little package with the Xnova motors. And they're not button head screws, which I rather use because most of the screws on here are the 2.5 mil screws, or they're M3s, but they're 2.5 Allen head. So now the ones they include in the package are, if you don't have these, you can use these. So there's the difference. These are just regular cap head, and then these are the, what do they call these? Well, I can't remember what these are called. If I remember, I will tell you. Let's get back to this. socket head. That's what they're called, I believe. It's actually what these washers are designed for, and that's why I prefer to use them. But it really doesn't matter. Alright, so camera is installed in the pod. In case you guys are wondering, this Runcam is got the 2.3mm lens, which is why it sits so deep inside here. For some reason they're shorter, and I like the lens. I do not like that it sits that far in the body, but oh well. If you have a Rotor Riot or the GoPro style 2.5 lens, it will literally sit like perfectly flush with this, which looks really cool if you drill that hole out in the right spot. Alright, so the next thing I like to do is I will put the I'm using a TBS UNIFI Pro. I believe this is the race edition, and as you can see right now, it does not have an antenna on it, and there's a reason for that, or whip I should say. There's no whip on it, and that's because the factory whip here, when you put it in the body, it sticks out too far down here, and it will either hit on your stack or it'll hit on something, and you'll either snap it off right here when this compresses in a crash. It's just no fun. It's a big pain in the ass. So you gotta pick yourself up one of these. I can't remember what vendor I got this from. I believe it I think it was Pyro. I think Pyro Flip sells these, so, or Pyro, however you pronounce it. But anyways, I can't remember what vendor I got these from exactly, but they are 90-degree SMA to UFL, or you can get RP SMA, depends on what antennas you're using. So, but it's a 90-degree, and it fits much nicer in the body, and it's got the whip's twice as long, which is kind of convenient for being able to flip it and bend it around in case you need to actually remove this to work on it for some reason. You don't have to remove this from the body if you don't want to. But I'm going to solder this onto here, but make it to where it's removable. So there's quite a few tutorials online on how to do this, but basically what I'm going to do is I'm putting the UFL on backwards. You want to be gentle with these because you can bend the pin, and that's no fun. There you go, snapped in place. Alright, so, and then what you're going to do is you're going to just put a little bit of solder right there to where this can't rotate. Now, you can break that solder off still, but in a setup like this where everything is encased in the body, it makes it way harder. And it makes it easier. Mainly I do this for removing it. So, grab these guys. That's it. This big pad right here is all ground. So just connecting those two together, and now it won't twist and bend around on you. And then if you really want to get technical with it for other frames, but I just do this pretty much on all my setups now. I take a little bit of electrical tape, and you can use heat shrink too, but I think the electrical tape you can get tighter. And you just want to go a few wraps around for strain relief. Now you can really yank on this wire and you're not disconnecting that UFL. Not gonna happen. So let's go ahead and put this in the body, which we're gonna have to do some surgery to. This here is the wiring harness for the Runcam Swift 2 camera, and as you can see, the pin out is different than the UNIFI harness. So there's a few things you can do. You can either chop both of these harnesses up and put this end on there, or you can do what I'm going to do, because I'm not using this extra pin right here, this blue one. This blue pin here is for if you want to run LiPo voltage into your camera, but because I'm using a BFF3 board, I'll already have an OSD with anything I ever need on it, plus some. So instead of hacking this harness all up, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set them both upside down, and I'm going to move these wires on this harness into the order that they are on this harness, so that I can then just plug this straight into the camera and all should work. So I will start by removing all of the wires from the harness by lifting up these little tabs and then pulling out the wire. You want to be somewhat gentle with these tabs, because you don't want to bend them up so bad that they get messed up. If you do bend them up a little too high, you can usually bend them back in place before you put the wire back in. Alright, so now we have the connector off, and we just need to put the wires in this order. So if you look on the back of the camera, you'll see it says exactly which wire goes where, which we covered up a little bit with the foam. So I'm just going to use this wire here as a reference. What we need to do is run 12 or VBAT in, tug on it, make sure it's in place. Then we need ground, and then video, and then audio. You want to make sure all these get pushed in and locked in place so they don't shove back out when you put them in your camera. Alright, so that is that. And our harness is made and ready to go in here. Plus your original harness for your camera is still intact in case you ever need it. Let's see here. That'll be good. So to mount the camera, you're going to want to make, you can do this really any way you want. This is the way I do it. I double up on the double side tape and I just flip it around itself to make it twice as thick, because there's a concave to the body, and that concave makes it to where tape doesn't want to stick in the middle, so there's no point in even putting it there. So take your double side, stick it on the edges after you've doubled it up. And now you're ready to put it in there. So now I run mine just like this, so there's no connections back here, because in a crash that camera will fold and the body does actually like crush in a wreck, and it will pop back. So you want to try to keep any connections away from the back of the camera area in case it rotates in a crash. So alright, just like that, it's all mounted in place. And then we just need to do the antenna. Like so. Alright, antenna's all locked in place, and then you can go ahead and plug in your camera. So, and I like to twist this wire up. Make sure you plug your camera in on the right side, which is the left side in this case. And yes, this is a 4-pin wide connector. It will fit into a 5-pin wide connector. Alright, so there's that. If you really want to get crazy, you can go and tuck these wires in. And there you go. That's the whole pod ready to go with everything on it. So, and then I normally solder this connector straight down to the BFF3 board or into my VBAT, right onto the LiPo voltage, and I usually have enough room to get the body on and off, but I think on this build I may actually try using some kind of small plug. We'll see when we get to that point, but having it to where this can be unplugged from the craft does make things a lot easier. So we'll see when we get to that point though. So that's the pod. It is done. Ready to go. Alright, there we go. There's the pod. It's all complete. And as you can see, there's a bunch of extra wires hanging out. Well, the reason for that is if we were just running our camera feed straight to our VTX and we were not running an OSD of any kind or running smart audio, all we would have needed to do is change those pins around and the wiring could all stay nice, tucked nice and neat down inside the pod, and all we would have needed to do is give it some power. But in my case, I'm running an OSD and I'm also running smart audio, so we need the smart audio wire and we need the video wires to also come out of the wiring harness so that we can get the OSD and the smart audio working. So like I said earlier, all you have to do is splice this wire in to the audio wire and run it down to TX3. If you're running a Runcam Swift 2, this will work. You do not need any extra circuitry of any kind, no capacitors. Basically, you're building a crossover, and you don't need to do that with the Runcam Swift 2. I haven't had any issues running it this way. If you're using any other camera than the Runcam Swift 2, you will more than likely need to build some type of crossover so that the microphone is not getting into the frequencies of the smart audio. So keep that in mind. If you're wanting to keep your build really neat at this time, you're going to have to run a Runcam Swift 2 if you're wanting to run smart audio without adding a bunch of extra stuff. And then obviously I had to extend these wires a little bit because all of these are going to the same location. So we needed to have a little extra length on these. That way we can pull the pod off and get the pod out of the way enough to unconnect the connectors here and here, because in order to get this pod completely out of the way of the stack, you're going to have to unconnect from the camera and from the VTX. So the only other thing is if you're wanting to do what I do, you'll have to wait to the end of the video when I get the full build finished, because what I'm going to do is chop out a connector, or chop out a space for the USB and for the SD card, which on this build are going to be right around here somewhere. But at the very end of the build, I'll go ahead and mark those out. I'll cut them out because you're going to need to get to those two things, and you're not going to want to pull the pod off every single time. If you aren't planning on data logging at all, then cutting this out isn't that big of a deal, because honestly you'll need to get to your SD card more than you need to get to the USB. Now that we can tune through the OSD or through a Lua script, really the only time you're going to need to use your USB is to get it connected and get it set up. And after that, most of your tuning can be done through the radio or through the OSD. But in my case, I end up cutting it out anyways just so I can get to it. Besides that, the SD card's directly below the USB, so I just cut out a bigger hole and haven't had any problems with cutting this area out. But I'll go ahead and do that at the end of my video when I finish the build, and you guys can see that. So if you want to see that, make sure you watch through the entire series of these videos, and that will be at the end. So other than that, the pod is completely done and ready to go. I will go and trim this out more. I like to trim it back because I use the 2.3 lens, which is shorter than the 2.1 or the 2.5 GoPro style lenses. I just like the little bit extra width that this lens has. So I'll end up going and cutting this in as well, but this is something you'll do based on what lens you're using. But other than that, the pod's ready, and we're going to go ahead and finish up the rest of the build. And like I said, if you want to see that, make sure you watch to the end of the video.